The first video on this new channel has officially launched. Support for this fresh start would be invaluable, and having you involved from the beginning is a priority. Please watch the footage and share your thoughts in the comments regarding what resonated most with you. The access link is available in the description section below. San Clemente, perched on the Southern California coast, has long represented the absolute pinnacle of high-end suburban life. Quiet avenues, framed by swaying palms and stately residences, project a pervasive atmosphere of total peace. This town draws those seeking quietude and safety for their families, existing far from the friction of the metropolis. Time drifts slowly here, and the minimal crime rate reinforces San Clemente's status as a pristine American dream. Consequently, the dark events of November 2016 struck this tranquil community like a devastating physical blow. Local citizens, used to an image of absolute security, were horrified by the violence uncovered inside a prominent couple's home. Philadelphia-born Suzanne Sills stood out from a very young age due to her magnetic and vibrant energy. Her outgoing personality and spirited nature made her a natural focal point in any social circle. Peers remember a woman who refused to be ignored, always ready with a clever remark or a helping hand. Widely recognized for her charisma, she graduated high school and enrolled at George Mason University in 1989. However, Suzanne's personal goals reached far beyond simply earning a university degree. She pursued a high-level career path, eventually securing an MBA in International Studies from Miami in 2000. This achievement marked her as a high achiever, someone uniquely equipped to handle the most demanding professional stakes. Friends often remarked on her effortless charm and her sophisticated ability to command any conversation. Razor sharp, she possessed a dry, polite wit that left a mark on everyone. Yet, beneath that polished, vibrant surface, a silent, agonizing struggle persisted, a desperate, unfulfilled longing to finally become a mother. Years of failed attempts to conceive left deep psychological scars she shared only with her most trusted circle. She maintained a happy public mask while fighting an exhausting, private battle that slowly drained her. This trauma would eventually define her path. Meanwhile, Scott Sills was already distinguishing himself as an anomaly. Classmates recalled him arriving at school wearing full three-piece suits instead of the usual casual attire. This behavior wasn't seen as strange. It was viewed as a mark of his individuality and his reputation for possessing an extraordinary, high-level intellect. Instructors frequently noted his total photographic recall and an uncanny ability to deconstruct complex problems instantly. To those who knew him then, he was a rare, genuine genius who impressed others with more than just his academic speed. He possessed a chillingly deep level of insight. After graduation, the future seemed limitless for Scott Sills. Success in any field was certain, yet Scott wasn't motivated by simple wealth or social status. He chose the medical field, drawn by the power of science to fundamentally alter the course of human lives. He eventually found his true calling, specializing in the complex world of reproductive medicine. This specialty requires both elite clinical precision and the empathy to handle patients facing immense emotional trauma. It didn't take long for him to rise as a premier authority in the field of infertility. His colleagues noted that he was never satisfied with following the standard medical status quo. He pushed every boundary, utilizing innovative tech and pioneering new methods while his career moved at light speed. He turned his youthful traits, precision, confidence, and a unique worldview into his greatest professional weapons. Eventually, the image of the brilliant, eccentric student was replaced by that of a high-stakes medical professional. He became the specialist that desperate families trusted with their most vulnerable and private hopes. His entire world, including his family and his clinic, was built upon the foundations of those early years. It was through this high-pressure clinical work that he first crossed paths with Suzanne. At the time, Suzanne was in her first marriage, struggling through the heartbreak of being unable to conceive. She sought out Scott, a rising star in fertility, hoping he could deliver the one thing she needed: motherhood. Their first encounters were clinical. He managed her care. She saw him as the only bridge to her future. Yet, no matter the struggle, her marriage buckled under the weight of constant failure, eventually shattering. Soon after, Scott's own domestic life followed suit. In that wreckage, their once sterile professional bond began to morph into something else. They sought refuge in one another, bound by shared scars and a mutual understanding of grief. Eventually, Suzanne and Scott exchanged vows. Twins arrived shortly thereafter, Eric and Marie Catherine, born through the miracle of IVF. It was Suzanne's ultimate victory, a long-sought transition into motherhood, while Scott saw his professional legacy manifest in his own flesh and blood. Together, they managed a sprawling, blended household. Suzanne stepped into the role of stepmother to Scott's previous children, while balancing the needs of their newborns. Their home became a chaotic mix of different backgrounds and ages, all living under one roof. From the curb, they looked like the model of suburban success, a family thriving on second chances. They projected a life of perfect equilibrium, balancing professional power with personal bliss. Their shared medical obsession had crystallized into a deep clinical intimacy, anchored by the birth of their children. To the public, it seemed like a natural evolution for two divorcees who had finally built a fortress of stability. It was a dynasty forged in ambition and mutual reliance, crowned by the joy of parenthood. By 2015, they decided to launch their own private fertility center. They shared a single goal, but their roles were strictly divided. Scott was the public face, the credentialed physician, and the charismatic specialist the world trusted. He was the draw, but the entire operational engine rested solely on Suzanne's shoulders. She worked the shadows, crafting the clinic's identity and building the brand from nothing. From marketing strategy to staff recruitment and equipment logistics, she controlled the environment. She handled the records, navigated the legal red tape, and secured the necessary business alliances. Without her relentless drive, their expansion would have stalled. Meanwhile, Scott's rising fame brought him to the small screen. He became a regular on CBS's The Doctors, lecturing millions on the complexities of infertility. These segments skyrocketed their visibility, funneling a steady stream of new patients through their doors. But behind those doors, it was Suzanne's invisible labor that kept the clinic from collapsing. The venture was a goldmine. Patients raved about the tranquil, personalized care, unaware it was the result of Suzanne's obsessive attention to detail. As demand surged, the couple transitioned from successful to untouchably wealthy. The world saw Scott as the charming medical authority and Suzanne as the master architect. They were a power couple, though the veneer was starting to crack. The crushing weight of the business began to suffocate Suzanne. Scott was often absent, chasing clinical prestige and media opportunities, leaving the endless administrative grind entirely to her. A quiet, dangerous distance grew between them. Their conflicting views on who was truly carrying the load became a source of silent, bitter strain. Outwardly, the image was flawless. Inwardly, Suzanne was redlining toward a total breakdown. The chasm between their public perfection and the reality of their workload became impossible to ignore. Suzanne found her only release on an anonymous web forum called Patrick.net. Using the handle Tortorella, she was infamous for her sharp tongue and abrasive wit. Even in that hostile, male-dominated space, she stood out. In one thread, she made a reckless, public wager. She promised to post a provocative photo if Donald Trump ever won the nomination. When he did, she didn't hesitate. To Suzanne, it was just a game, a way to prove she always kept her word. But within the walls of her marriage, that defiance would be seen in a much darker light. Scott had spent a lifetime polishing his reputation as a dignified doctor, and he wasn't about to let it be tarnished. A sudden lapse in their public image threatened the pristine facade they maintained for both staff and patients. A physical copy of the online thread was later located in the study, proving Scott had been monitoring the situation. He had clearly done more than just look. He had studied the contents with surgical precision. This was the catalyst for a growing divide between their curated public masks and the grim domestic reality. They were the prominent co-founders of a lucrative reproductive medicine clinic, raising 4 children in an idyllic California enclave. But behind the suburban veneer, their partnership was disintegrating under the weight of mismatched expectations, unspoken resentments, and a toxic struggle for dominance. On the night of November 12, 2016, everything appeared routine. No guests visited, and no errands were run. It was a typical evening of isolation. Suzanne was incapacitated by a violent migraine. The sensory overload forced her to disconnect her electronics and seek refuge in total darkness. After attempting to rest downstairs, she migrated to her daughter's room to find true silence. Before retiring, she executed her standard nightly ritual, locking the dogs in their crates to ensure a quiet night. By then, Marie Catherine was already unconscious. Her son Eric went down to check his mother's condition. Their interaction was minimal, a few whispered words to gauge her pain before he retreated back upstairs. A temporary stillness settled over the house. At roughly 3:40 a.m., Eric was pulled from sleep by voices. It wasn't an explosive argument, yet the chilling tone of his parents' conversation felt deeply wrong. He could hear them debating clinic business and electronic correspondence. Suzanne was fixated on answering messages, fearing any lapse would damage their professional operations. Scott countered her, demanding she shut the laptop and focus on her health. According to Eric's account, the friction lasted no more than 5 minutes. Avoiding the conflict, Eric retreated to the master bedroom to lie beside his sister. He told her the parents were just discussing work and that they should stay put until morning. No further footsteps were heard on the stairs, and he never saw his father return to the upper floor. The residence fell into a heavy silence. To keep the peace for Marie Catherine, the hallway was left in a dim haze. The bedroom door was cracked open for Suzanne's arrival, a choice driven by the agonizing severity of her headache. The slightest vibration had become a source of physical trauma for her. No calls, no alarms, and no intruders disturbed the home that night. The perimeter was locked tight. Sunday morning was supposed to be a return to normalcy. When dawn broke on November 13, 2016, the children gathered with Scott in the master suite. Scott was remarkably upbeat, enthusiastically discussing a family trip to the pool followed by a large breakfast. His tone was steady and familiar, projecting the illusion of a quiet weekend morning. Marie Catherine was the first to leave the room. As she peered over the second-floor railing, she saw a sight that would haunt her forever. A silent, still figure was sprawled at the foot of the staircase. It was Suzanne, lying flat on her back with a scarf cinched tightly around her neck. Driven by adrenaline, the young girl sprinted down to reach her mother. She ripped the scarf away and begged for her mother to wake, but there was no pulse. Eric arrived moments later. He stopped dead on the stairs, processing the nightmare unfolding below. He watched his sister's desperate, failed attempts to resuscitate the woman. Eric would later recall the eerie absence of debris, broken glass, or any signs of a struggle. The scene was too clean for a fall. Scott arrived next, his reaction eerily controlled. He delivered a cold instruction for the children to back away and touch nothing. He dialed 911. That recording would eventually serve as the prosecution's centerpiece. Scott's voice was hauntingly steady throughout the entire conversation. He provided the location, reporting that his wife was lifeless without breath or pulse. He verified they were alone. The operator immediately initiated emergency protocols, assessing vitals and ordering immediate chest compressions, maintaining contact until sirens arrived. Scott followed every directive with eerie, robotic efficiency. His voice lacked any hint of hysteria. He sounded detached, almost clinical. That mechanical composure would quickly draw the attention of detectives. If this case fascinates you, consider subscribing to Mass Crimes for more investigations. I truly value your viewership. Marie Catherine watched from the side, clutching a scarf, paralyzed by the sight. Following her father's lead, she placed the garment on a nearby table. Eric waited on the steps, eyes glued to the entrance. Silence dominated the home, broken only by Scott's flat reports. Minutes felt like hours. The children were submerged in a reality too cold to comprehend. They leaned on their father's stoic mask, hoping his calmness meant everything was under control. It wasn't. Scott confirmed she was gone. He mirrored the dispatcher's orders perfectly, but the body remained unresponsive. When the first responders reached the Sills property, Scott greeted them with a prepackaged narrative. He claimed Suzanne, suffering from migraines, must have tumbled down the stairs overnight. He maintained he found her body at the foot of the flight. The story was delivered without a tremor, yet his lack of emotion struck a nerve with the officers. He welcomed a search without hesitation, guiding the officers through the rooms. He insisted there were no secrets. To the investigators, this transparency felt rehearsed, like a staged performance. As the team began their documentation, a jarring detail emerged. A steel pot sat at the stair's base. It was completely illogical. The kitchen was far off, and the home was otherwise spotless. A cooking utensil had no reason to be there. When questioned, Scott had no answer. The second red flag centered on the scarf. Although moved by the daughter, its intricate knots suggested deliberate hands rather than a random fall. Crime scene experts noted the wrapping didn't match the physics of an accidental injury. Then there were the pills. Empty migraine packs sat on Suzanne's nightstand, but the count didn't align with her prescribed treatment schedule. Oddly, the packaging was arranged with a precision that felt forced, as if meant to be found. Investigators noted further inconsistencies. The house's unnerving order, the lack of any struggle, and the heavy, artificial stillness of the environment. Nothing about the environment suggested an accidental death. It felt like a set that had been carefully curated to mimic one. Despite the suspicion, no arrests were made yet. Legally, it could still be seen as a tragedy. But the anomalies, the pot, the scarf, the medication whispered a different story. That suspicion drove a deeper forensic autopsy of the home. The initial sweep of the Sills residence quickly bore fruit. Detailed forensic analysis produced findings that fundamentally rewrote the night's narrative. While the stairs supported his claim, evidence elsewhere told a far more violent story. Inside the daughter's room, investigators hit a breakthrough. Blood. Not just a drop, but a spray of biological evidence across walls, curtains, and chairs. Forensic evidence pointed to a violent struggle. DNA testing confirmed the biological stains belonged to Suzanne. Detectives also found strands of her hair. They weren't merely resting on the rug, but were snagged in the drapes, suggesting a forceful struggle. This proved Suzanne was in that room when she was attacked. Scott claimed he noticed nothing unusual, maintaining he found his wife downstairs and called 911 immediately. However, his story collapsed when faced with the physical reality of the scene. The bloodstains were far too prominent to miss. His claim of ignorance felt like a calculated lie. Adding to the suspicion, a medical check revealed fresh marks on Scott, a scalp laceration, and arm bruising. He blamed car repairs with his son. This moment shifted the investigation's entire trajectory. For the first time, the chasm between Scott's story and the hard facts became undeniable. Authorities concluded the tragedy could not have unfolded the way he portrayed. The blood splatter in his daughter's quarters, plus his shifting accounts, suggested a hidden reality, one that had been masked and now required meticulous unmasking. The case hit a tipping point during the forensic post-mortem, a clinical deep dive to determine if her passing was a mishap or a killing. Inside the morgue, pathologists scrutinized her remains. Their first major discovery was a break in her third cervical vertebra, the C3. Such trauma implies manual strangulation, far more than a simple tumble onto the floor. This was the first definitive proof, shattering the image of a tragic domestic accident. Subsequent analysis uncovered the classic internal markers of mechanical asphyxia. The impressions on her throat aligned perfectly with the dimensions of the scarf found at the scene. These pressure lines were sharp and intentional, far too localized to be accidental. The tight knot and specific bruising proved the fabric was used to choke the life out of her. A haunting detail emerged: petechial hemorrhaging across her eyes, tiny blood spots caused by air deprivation, the unmistakable signature of suffocation. No staircase tumble causes these symptoms. Experts ruled Suzanne's death was a murder. It was the result of cold, physical aggression. Every suspicion held by the police was now backed by the weight of scientific proof. The silk wrap the daughter had loosened was, in fact, the murder weapon. In 2017, after final medical reports were filed, Suzanne Sills' death was officially stamped as a homicide. This classification changed everything. The police weren't looking at a tragedy anymore. They were building a case for a cold-blooded killing. The state abandoned the theory of an accident, pivoting toward the deliberate, violent mechanics of a crime. In this new framework, Scott Sills became the prime suspect. Everyone expected a grieving widower to withdraw, seeking solace in the privacy of his mourning. Instead, his behavior took a bizarre turn that shocked many. Rather than being paralyzed by grief, Scott seemed to shed his old skin. Almost overnight, he resurfaced as a different man. He began flooding social media with gym selfies, showcasing a sudden obsession with body sculpting and a strange, defiant confidence. The optics were unsettling. His public enthusiasm for this rebirth felt entirely disconnected from the gravity of his wife's death. Simultaneously, Scott developed a taste for high-end Porsches, embracing an expensive, flashier way of life. This narcissistic display stood in haunting contrast to a man in mourning. It looked like a smokescreen. The presence of a new woman soon became impossible to ignore. Scott made zero effort to hide her, flaunting the new romance at public gatherings. He projected an image of a man who had rapidly and very visibly distanced himself from his wife's passing. This evolution wasn't just digital. Those in his inner circle started noticing a fundamental shift in how he looked and carried himself. The once stoic and disciplined doctor was gone, replaced by a persona that felt more like a polished television figure. Sharp custom suits, high-end watches, expensive glasses, and a coiffed look better suited for a red carpet. The change was jarringly obvious. Detectives found his conduct jarringly at odds with the expected mourning process following such a violent, unexpected tragedy. This disconnect between societal grief norms and Scott's reality served as another warning sign for the police, especially as forensic leads began to pile up. Instead of seeking solitude, he actively sought out the center of attention. High-end living, his public brand, it suggested a man far more concerned with rebranding his life than honoring the one he lost, a man who seemed to view his wife's demise as the launchpad for a meticulously designed fresh start. By spring 2019, the probe peaked. On April 25th, Scott Sills was taken into custody. The takedown was sudden. Officers cut him off while he was driving to his medical practice to see patients. At the point of his detention, the prosecution had already compiled a mountain of incriminating data. Forensic science provided the smoking gun. Investigators identified blood from both the victim and the suspect at the location. Certain biological traces revealed a commingling of their DNA, proving a violent struggle occurred, and stripping away any claims that their proximity was merely accidental. The digital trail was equally damning. Suzanne's handheld device and encrypted chats painted a grim portrait of the weeks preceding her final moments. Within those messages, she spoke of her suffocating situation, using haunting words like, "You are destroying me, and I need to leave." Her text exposed a crumbling union and a woman pushed to her limit. Detectives managed to reconstruct her digital interactions and social media footprints. These logs documented a relationship that had devolved from a partnership into a source of unending psychological strain. Those communications foreshadowed a psychological breaking point and eventually anchored the prosecution's case. Following the arrest in April 2019, the legal machinery turned toward building a bulletproof trial strategy. The state's office categorized vast troves of data, verified thousands of pages, and lined up specialist witnesses, crafting a narrative designed to survive any counterattack from the defense. His lawyers attempted to dismiss the state's entire argument as nothing more than a series of coincidental guesses, forcing the state to double down on their investigative findings, sharpening their medical analysis, and locking in the chronology. What followed was a grueling legal siege for the doctor. Legal proceedings stalled again and again due to defense maneuvers, though the global health crisis caused the longest freeze, shutting down the courts for nearly a year. For those who loved the victim, the agonizing delay was soul-crushing. Yet the police used that time to tighten the noose. Simultaneously, the defense exploited the lull, fighting to throw out blood evidence and suppress records, maintaining the facade of a freak accident while waiting for the media storm to blow over. Finally, in 2023, a jury was called. Following years of meticulous work, the file left the detective's desk to be judged by 12 strangers in a box. The extended wait only served to hone the opposing legal strategies for what would become a high-stakes local courtroom drama. The trial devolved into a clash of two irreconcilable stories. The state presented a calculated, orchestrated murder, while his team stood by the theory of a clumsy mishap. Clinicians backed the state's claims, testifying that the trauma to her body simply didn't match a tumble down the stairs. Scientific analysis bolstered the criminal charges, leading to one unavoidable problem for the doctor. If she had tripped by the stairs, how did her blood end up across the house? His lawyers had no believable answer. Despite the pressure, his legal counsel refused to abandon their original story. They even floated a bizarre claim suggesting the household pets were somehow to blame. Defense counsel suggested the family pets inadvertently tightened the fabric around her neck, but medical examiners dismissed the theory, citing evidence of targeted physical force. Forensic investigators uncovered signs of deliberate human intervention within the daughter's bedroom, contradicting any notion of animal-induced disarray. The proceedings reached a psychological peak during the children's statements. Eric recounted hearing a volatile domestic dispute erupting between his parents. A chilling quiet descended afterward, and the boy's account systematically dismantled his father's alibi regarding mechanical work, casting a shadow over the man's claims. The courtroom transformed into a battlefield where two irreconcilable versions of the truth collided in a struggle for narrative dominance. One side relied on forensic certainty and witness accounts. The other leaned on increasingly desperate and improbable conjectures. Jurors faced a haunting binary. Was the defendant a shattered widower or the cold architect of his wife's demise? Following a grueling period of litigation, the narrative involving the family dogs crumbled under the weight of professional scrutiny. The defendant's reliability evaporated as investigators exposed a pattern of deceptive contradictions within his sworn testimony. The panel ultimately delivered a guilty verdict for second-degree murder, leaving the gallery in a heavy silence as loved ones processed the long-overdue justice. In March 2023, the magistrate handed down a sentence of life imprisonment without parole. On that day, Marie Catherine provided a gut-wrenching final statement. She offered a desperate appeal for mercy, fearing that after losing her mother, the state would permanently sever her last remaining link to her father. Bound by the weight of the evidence, the judge maintained the severe penalty, forcing the young woman to confront a total collapse of her family unit. With her mother in a grave and her father behind bars forever, her reality was stripped of its foundation. Her testimony lingered in the air, a reminder that beneath the legal jargon lies a landscape of profound and intimate devastation. It revealed a harrowing truth. The ultimate casualty of such violence is often the child caught in the crossfire of trauma and the law. The state characterized the homicide as the pinnacle of treachery, a violent erasure of life, and a permanent fracturing of sacred trust. Dr. Scott Sills, a man once sworn to heal, had instead dismantled his household from the inside, leaving the children orphans of the living. The residence, formerly echoing with familial warmth, now stood as a silent monument to an irreversible catastrophe and total psychological loss. Follow the investigation further at my new outlet, Masked Crimes, for all future reports on the dark side of the human psyche. This platform will no longer host new content due to financial restrictions. I look forward to continuing our deep dives at the new location. The Architecture of Betrayal, a lesson from the Sills case. The tragedy of Suzanne and Scott Sills serves as a chilling reminder that the most polished facades often hide the deepest fractures. We live in an era of curated perfection, where social media and professional prestige can mask a hollow reality. But as this case reveals, a model life built on the foundations of silenced resentment and toxic dominance is merely a house of cards waiting for a gale. The most haunting lesson here is the perversion of trust. Scott Sills, a man sworn by the Hippocratic Oath to heal and protect life, became the very force that extinguished it. When we prioritize reputation over relationship and image over intimacy, we lose our humanity. Ambition, when stripped of empathy, becomes a weapon. Let this story be a call to look beneath the surface. Real success isn't found in a fortress of stability or a high-end lifestyle. It is found in the safety of our own homes. True love does not require a mask, and a sacred bond should never be a battlefield. We must remember that the ultimate casualties of domestic shadows are the children, the orphans of the living, who are left to navigate a world where their foundations have turned to dust. Choose truth over appearance and compassion over control. Don't let your legacy be a silent monument to a catastrophe that could have been prevented by a single moment of honest humanity.